They called us primitive, barbaric, unworthy of joining the Galactic Council's peaceful civilization. When humanity first reached for the stars, we were met not with wonder or welcome, but with disgust. Our aggressive nature, our endless wars, our refusal to submit to their perfect order, it all marked us as a species too dangerous for their pristine galaxy. The Council's rejection was unanimous. Humanity was quarantined to our solar system, surrounded by an energy barrier that would keep us trapped like animals in a cage. They believed this would be the end of our story, that we would eventually destroy ourselves in our own violent nature, solving their human problem without them having to dirty their hands. They were wrong. What they didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had always been our ability to thrive in the shadows, to turn rejection into revolution, to build something greater from the ashes of defeat. While they celebrated their victory and returned to their comfortable, stagnant civilization, we got to work. In the darkness between stars, in the forgotten corners of space, in the places they deemed worthless and ignored, humanity began to build. Not just ships or weapons or technology, we built an empire that would grow in secret, fed by our determination and forged by our refusal to accept their judgment. They rejected us because they feared what we might become. Soon, they would discover they were right to be afraid. The galaxy had made its choice about humanity. Now humanity was about to return the favor. The shadows were about to strike back. Captain Sarah Chun stood before the massive viewing screen aboard the UES Endeavour, watching the impossible structure that hung in space before them. The Galactic Council's primary station was a marvel of engineering that defied human understanding. Crystalline spires twisted through dimensions that shouldn't exist, connected by bridges of pure energy that pulsed with the rhythm of a vast alien heartbeat. 3 years ago, this moment had seemed like the culmination of humanity's greatest dream. First contact, recognition, a seat at the table with the ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The journey to reach this point had taken everything humanity could muster: their finest ship, their best diplomats, and the hopes of 8 billion souls back on Earth. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the council chambers," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. His voice carried the tension that had been building in everyone aboard the ship for the past week. They all knew what this meeting would determine. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face showing the strain of the negotiations that had been grinding on for days. At 62, he had commanded respect throughout the Solar Defense Fleet. But here, surrounded by beings whose civilizations had spanned millions of years, he felt the weight of humanity's youth. "Put it through, Lieutenant." The screen flickered, and the familiar form of Counselor Vexthani appeared. The Zalari representative was humanoid in the loosest sense, tall and ethereal, with skin that shifted between silver and blue like liquid metal. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in human bones. "Admiral Rodriguez, Captain Chun, the Council has reached its decision regarding humanity's petition for membership." Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Around her, the bridge crew had gone silent. This was the moment that would determine humanity's future among the stars. The Council recognizes that humanity has achieved interstellar travel and has demonstrated certain technological capabilities. Vexthani continued, her tone as cold as the void between stars. "However, after extensive deliberation and review of your species' historical records, we have concluded that humanity is not suitable for membership in the galactic community." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah saw Admiral Rodriguez's jaw clench, but his expression remained diplomatically neutral. "Counselor, perhaps you could elaborate on the specific concerns the Council has identified," Rodriguez said carefully. "We've provided extensive documentation of our cultural evolution and peaceful intentions." Vexthani's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her large, dark eyes that might have been disdain. "Admiral, your species is engaged in continuous warfare for its entire recorded history. Even now, as you reach for the stars, conflicts rage on your homeworld. Your aggressive tendencies, your primitive tribalism, your inability to achieve true unity. These are not merely historical artifacts. They are fundamental aspects of human nature." "But, Counselor," Captain Chun interjected, unable to remain silent. Every species has had periods of conflict. Surely the potential for growth. Captain Vexthani interrupted. The Zalari achieved global peace 12 million years ago. The Threnodai have not known war for 8 million years. The Kithran Republic has maintained perfect social harmony for 6 million years. Your species achieved spaceflight less than a century ago and still maintains weapons of mass destruction aimed at your own cities. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt a growing knot of anger in her stomach, but she forced herself to remain professional. What exactly are you proposing, Counselor? Admiral Rodriguez asked. The Council has voted to implement protective measures to ensure the safety of the galactic community. Humanity will be restricted to your solar system until such time as your species demonstrates genuine evolution beyond its current primitive state. Restricted how? Rodriguez demanded, his diplomatic mask finally slipping. A containment barrier will be established at the edge of your solar system. This will prevent human expansion while allowing your species to continue its development in isolation. The barrier will be monitored regularly, and should humanity demonstrate significant cultural advancement over the next several millennia, the Council may reconsider. Several millennia. The words echoed in Sarah's mind like a death sentence. By the time the Council might be willing to reconsider, every human alive today would be dust. Counselor, with respect, Admiral Rodriguez said, his voice tight with controlled fury. This amounts to imprisonment of our entire species based on assumptions about our future behavior. It is protection for the galaxy, Vexthani replied without emotion. Your own history validates our concerns. In the past century alone, you have engaged in 2 global wars that killed hundreds of millions of your own kind. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your entire planet. You have fouled your own atmosphere and oceans. This is not the behavior of a species ready for the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. Sarah couldn't hold back any longer. And what about the progress we've made? What about the United Earth Coalition? What about the fact that we've had global peace for the past 15 years? What about our space exploration programs, our scientific achievements, our art and culture? 15 years, Vexthani said, as if the number itself was laughable. Captain, my species measures stability in geological time. 15 years is not even a noteworthy pause in your species' pattern of violence. The counselor's image shifted slightly, and, for a moment, other figures could be seen behind her, representatives of the dozen major species that dominated the Galactic Council. Sarah caught glimpses of the massive crab-like Threnodai, the floating energy beings called the Nexari, and the crystalline structures that house the collective consciousness of the synthesis. All of them watching, all of them judging, all of them finding humanity wanting. The decision is final, Vexthani continued. The barrier will be activated within 72 hours. I suggest you use that time to return to your home system. Any human vessels found outside the barrier after activation will be destroyed without warning. Wait, Rodriguez said quickly. We came here in good faith, following your own protocols for first contact. We've committed no crimes, threatened no one. On what authority? On the authority granted to us by 10 million years of galactic peace, Vexthani cut him off. The Council exists to preserve that peace. Humanity represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability. The decision stands. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the Endeavor in stunned silence. Sarah stared at the blank screen, feeling as if someone had reached into her chest and torn out her heart. Around her, she could hear the quiet sounds of people crying, swearing, or simply breathing hard as they tried to process what had just happened. Admiral, came a voice from behind them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, approached with several other senior staff members. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with an anger that Sarah had never seen in a normally calm scientist. They didn't even consider our arguments, Dr. Vasquez said. 3 years of preparation, months of negotiations, and they had already made up their minds before we ever arrived. The fix was in from the beginning, agreed Commander James Park, the ship's tactical officer. They wanted to see us as dangerous primitives, so that's all they looked for. Admiral Rodriguez turned away from the screen and looked around at his assembled officers. Sarah could see him struggling with the magnitude of their failure. This wasn't just a diplomatic setback. It was the death of humanity's dreams of joining galactic civilization. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, what do we do now? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the impossible architecture of the council station. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but carried an undertone of steel that Sarah had never heard before. We go home, he said. We tell Earth what happened here. And then we figure out what comes next. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, but it felt like an eternity. News of the Council's decision spread through the ship like a plague, leaving despair and anger in its wake. Some crew members retreated into themselves, others raged against the injustice, and a few simply broke down completely. Sarah found herself spending long hours in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars and trying to make sense of it all. How could a galaxy full of intelligent species be so closed-minded? How could beings who had achieved such technological marvels be so quick to dismiss an entire species based on prejudice? It was during one of these contemplative sessions that Dr. Vasquez joined her. The xenobiologist looked haggard, her usually perfect hair disheveled, and her eyes rimmed with red from lack of sleep. I keep thinking about what that counselor said, Elena said, settling into the chair beside Sarah. About measuring stability in geological time. It was arrogant, Sarah replied bitterly. Just because they've had peace for millions of years doesn't make them better than us. But what if she was right? Elena asked quietly. Not about us being unworthy, but about the time scales involved. What if 15 years really is just a blip to them? What if our entire recorded history is just a moment in their perspective? Sarah turned to look at her friend. Elena, you can't seriously be defending their decision. I'm not defending it, Elena said quickly. I'm trying to understand it. And I think I'm starting to see something that terrifies me. Think about it, Sarah. These civilizations have been spacefaring for millions of years. They've probably seen hundreds of species reach for the stars. And if most of them were violent, aggressive, dangerous, maybe they've learned to be very, very careful about who they let into their club. So we get punished for the sins of species that went extinct before Earth even formed. Maybe, Elena said, or maybe we get punished because we really are dangerous. Think about what we've accomplished in just the last century, Sarah. We went from horse-drawn carriages to interstellar travel. We split the atom. We mapped the human genome. We built artificial intelligence. The rate of our technological advancement is exponential, and exponential growth is inherently unstable. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think they're afraid of us? I think they're terrified of us, Elena said. Not because of what we are now, but because of what we might become. A species that goes from stone tools to interstellar travel in 10,000 years. A species that refuses to stay down no matter how many times it gets knocked down. Maybe from their perspective, keeping us contained isn't cruelty, it's survival. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars whirl past. Finally, Sarah spoke. So what do we do? Just accept it? Spend the rest of human history trapped in our own solar system? Elena's expression hardened, and for a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of something fierce and uncompromising in her friend's eyes. Hell no, Elena said quietly. We prove them wrong. We show them that they made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Ow, I don't know yet, Elena admitted. But humanity's greatest strength has never been our technology or our weapons. It's been our refusal to accept defeat. They want to keep us in a cage? Fine. We'll use the time to get stronger, to get smarter, to get ready. Ready for what? Elena smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Ready to show them that underestimating humanity is a mistake that civilizations don't get to make twice. As the Endeavor crossed the boundary into the solar system, Sarah could see the first signs of the containment barrier beginning to form. Energy discharges flickered at the edge of sensor range, and space itself seemed to shimmer as reality was bent to the Council's will. They were home. They were trapped. And somewhere in the depths of her soul, Sarah Chun felt something dark and determined beginning to grow. The galaxy had rejected humanity. Now it was time to see what humanity would do about it. 5 years after the containment barrier sealed humanity into their home system, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in a place that officially didn't exist. The facility, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Australian outback, hummed with activity that would have been impossible to imagine before the rejection. The Prometheus project had started as a whispered conversation between a dozen scientists and military leaders who refused to accept humanity's cage. Now, it had grown into something that spanned the globe, hidden in plain sight beneath research stations, military bases, and corporate headquarters. What had begun as defiance had evolved into something far more dangerous: hope. The latest sensor sweep confirms it, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed readings from the barrier's edge. The Council ships have reduced their monitoring frequency. They're only checking our containment every 6 months now instead of weekly. Elena nodded, making notes on her tablet. They think we've accepted our fate. Good. That gives us more room to work. Around them, the Prometheus facility buzzed with quiet efficiency. In one section, teams of engineers worked on propulsion systems that bore no resemblance to the fusion drives that had carried humanity to the stars. In another, xenobiologists studied tissue samples recovered from the Council station during their final diplomatic mission. And in the deepest levels, theoretical physicists grappled with concepts that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about the nature of reality. Elena, you need to see this, called DR. Marcus Webb from across the Central Lab. The former NASA astrophysicist had been one of the first recruits to the Prometheus project, and his expertise in exotic matter had proven invaluable. Elena crossed to Webb's workstation, where a three-dimensional model of local space rotated slowly in the air. The containment barrier appeared as a shimmering sphere around the solar system. But Webb had highlighted something else: tiny distortions in the barrier's structure that pulsed with a regular rhythm. It's not a perfect sphere, Webb explained, excitement evident in his voice. The barrier has to account for gravitational fluctuations, solar wind, cosmic radiation. And to do that, it needs to constantly adjust itself. And Elena prompted. And that means it's not impenetrable. It's a dynamic system, which means it has vulnerabilities. Look here. Webb highlighted a section of the barrier near the edge of the Kuiper belt. Every 14 hours, there's a microfracture that lasts for approximately 1.3 seconds. The gap is only about 50 meters wide, but theoretically, something very small could slip through, Elena finished. Something the size of a probe, or a ship, if we build it right, Webb said. The margins would be incredibly tight, and we'd have exactly one chance to get it right, but it's possible. Elena felt her pulse quicken. For 5 years, they'd been preparing for a future they couldn't even properly envision. They had developed new technologies, trained new specialists, and built a shadow infrastructure that spanned the solar system. But until now, it had all been theoretical. This was their first real chance to strike back. How long would it take to design and build a ship that could fit through that gap? She asked. 6 months, minimum, Webb replied. But, Elena, even if we could get a ship out, where would it go? The nearest inhabited system is 47 light-years away. With our current technology, that's a one-way trip that would take centuries. Not with our current technology, Elena said quietly. Come with me. There's something I need to show you. She led Webb deeper into the facility, past security checkpoints that required biometric scans, genetic verification, and psychological evaluation. The deeper levels of Prometheus were known only to a select few, and what they contained represented humanity's greatest secret. The laboratory they entered looked more like a cathedral than a workspace. The ceiling soared overhead, disappearing into shadows, while banks of equipment lined the walls in precise geometric patterns. At the center of the room, suspended in a containment field that made the air itself shimmer, was a sphere of metal unlike anything else on Earth. Is that? Webb breathed. Hull, plating from a Council ship, Elena confirmed. We managed to recover it during our withdrawal from the station. It's been the focus of our materials research for the past 3 years. Dr. Sarah Chun emerged from behind one of the equipment banks, her uniform bearing the insignia of the Prometheus project. The former Starship captain had become one of the project's key administrators, coordinating between the various research teams and the growing network of off-world facilities. Marcus, Sarah nodded in greeting. Elena's been wanting to read you into this program for months. Are you ready to see what humanity can accomplish when it stops playing by other people's rules? Webb approached the containment field slowly, his scientific mind racing to process what he was seeing. The metal sphere appeared solid, but instruments showed that its internal structure defied conventional physics. Matter and energy existed in states that shouldn't be possible, creating properties that bordered on magic. We call it adaptive matter, Elena explained. The Council's technology doesn't just manipulate physical forces. It manipulates the fundamental constants that govern how matter and energy interact. This single sphere contains enough computational power to model the behavior of an entire galaxy. But the power requirements, Webb started, are generated by the matter itself, Sarah interrupted. It's not just a material. It's a self-sustaining system that draws energy from quantum fluctuations in space-time. We've been learning to replicate it. Webb stared at the sphere, his mind reeling with the implications. How much progress have you made? Enough, Elena said simply. She led him to another section of the lab, where a much smaller piece of metal sat on an examination table. This one was clearly human-made, its surface showing the slight imperfections that marked it as a product of Earth's manufacturing techniques. But when instruments were turned on it, it displayed the same impossible readings as the alien artifact. We can't match the Council's level of sophistication yet, Sarah explained. Our version is crude, unstable, and requires massive amounts of rare earth elements. But it works. How does this help us build a ship that can escape the barrier? Webb asked. Elena smiled. Because adaptive matter doesn't just store energy and information, it can manipulate space itself. A ship built with this technology wouldn't have to travel 47 light-years to reach another star system. It could fold space, creating a shortcut that reduces the distance to something manageable. Webb felt the blood drain from his face. You're talking about faster-than-light travel. That's impossible. The Council seems to manage it just fine, Sarah pointed out. Their ships appeared at the edge of our solar system without any apparent travel time. Either they've been hiding in our neighborhood for years, or they have FTL capability. But the energy requirements for folding space would be enormous, Webb protested. Even with adaptive matter, you need a power source equivalent to a small star. Which brings us to the second part of the project, Elena said, leading him to yet another section of the vast laboratory. This area was different from the rest, sealed behind additional barriers, and staffed by people wearing full environmental suits. At its center stood a device that hurt to look at directly, its geometry twisting in ways that made Webb's eyes water and his brain struggle to process what he was seeing. What the hell is that? He whispered. We're calling it a dimensional resonator, Elena replied, based on principles we derive from studying the barrier itself. The Council's containment system doesn't just block matter and energy, it creates a pocket of altered space-time around our solar system. We've learned to replicate that effect on a much smaller scale. Dr. Lisa Park, the project's chief physicist, approached them wearing one of the environmental suits. Her voice came through the suit's speakers with a slight electronic distortion. The resonator creates a localized space-time distortion, she explained. Inside the field, the normal rules of physics are suspended. We can generate massive amounts of energy without violating conservation laws, because the energy is being drawn from parallel dimensional spaces. Webb felt like his understanding of reality was crumbling around him. This is beyond anything we should be capable of. How did you even begin to develop this? By studying our captors, Sarah said grimly. Every piece of technology the Council uses operates on principles that humanity has never encountered. But they're not magic. They're science we haven't learned yet. So we learned. Elena gestured toward a series of displays that showed the progress of various research teams around the solar system. We have 17 facilities like this one, Webb, hidden bases on Mars, asteroid mining operations that are really weapons factories, research stations on the outer moons that are developing technologies the Council thinks we're centuries away from understanding. The beauty of being underestimated, Sarah added, is that nobody watches for things they think you can't do. Webb walked slowly around the dimensional resonator, trying to wrap his mind around the implications of what he was seeing. How many people know about this? Fewer than 1,000, Elena replied, scattered across the solar system, working on pieces of a larger puzzle. Most of them don't know the full scope of what we're building. And what exactly are we building? Webb asked. Sarah and Elena exchanged a look. It was Elena who finally answered. Freedom, she said simply. The Council thinks they can keep humanity contained while they decide our fate over the course of millennia. They think we'll either destroy ourselves or eventually evolve into something they find acceptable. They're wrong on both counts. We're not going to wait for their approval, Sarah continued. And we're not going to stay trapped in our own solar system while they debate whether we deserve to exist. We're going to break out. And then? Webb asked. Then, we show them that they made a mistake, Elena said. They rejected us because they thought we were too dangerous for their peaceful galaxy. Maybe it's time to prove them right. Webb stared at the alien technology around him, feeling the weight of humanity's future settling on his shoulders. What do you need me to do? Elena smiled. Help us build a ship that can slip through their barrier undetected. Help us develop the technology to reach other star systems faster than they think possible. Help us turn their own weapons against them. This is treason against the Galactic Council, Webb said quietly. The Galactic Council committed an act of war against humanity when they imprisoned our entire species, Sarah replied. We're just responding in kind. Webb looked around the laboratory one more time, taking in the impossible technology and the determined faces of his colleagues. 5 years ago, humanity had been rejected by galactic civilization and trapped in their home system. Now, they were secretly developing technologies that could challenge the most advanced species in the galaxy. When do we start? He asked. We already have, Elena said. The first ship will be ready for testing in 8 months. If it works, we'll begin Phase 2, which is... Elena's expression grew cold and determined. We stop hiding. We stop asking for permission. And we start taking what's ours. As Webb signed the security documents that would make him part of humanity's greatest secret, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. The galaxy had rejected them as too dangerous to be trusted with freedom. Soon, they would discover just how dangerous a rejected species could become. Captain Marcus Rodriguez III stood on the bridge of humanity's first stealth ship, watching sensors that showed impossible readings. The HMS Shadow wasn't much to look at from the outside, barely 50 meters long and built with angular lines that seemed to bend light around them. But what mattered wasn't how the ship appeared, but how it didn't appear. Barrier gap opening in 30 seconds, Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim from the navigation station. Her fingers danced across controls that had been designed based on principles humanity wasn't supposed to understand for another 1,000 years. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. He was the grandson of the admiral who had led humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council, and he carried both the memory of that failure and the determination to ensure it never happened again. The past 10 years have been spent in preparation for this moment. The first time a human ship would leave the solar system since the barrier had been activated. Stealth systems at maximum, called out Dr. Elena Vasquez from the science station. Now in her 50s, the former xenobiologist had become one of the key architects of humanity's shadow war against the galaxy. We're operating at less than 0.003% of baseline emissions. As far as any sensors are concerned, we don't exist. Dimensional full drive, standing by, added Chief Engineer David Park. The massive Korean-American had spent 5 years learning to manipulate technologies that defied human understanding. Space-time distortion field is stable and ready for activation. Marcus looked around at his crew, 12 of humanity's finest, all volunteers for a mission that might be a one-way trip. They had trained for 3 years in facilities that didn't officially exist, preparing for operations that no human government would publicly acknowledge. They were warriors, scientists, and explorers rolled into one, and they represented the sharp edge of humanity's refusal to accept their cage. Gap opening now, Kim announced. Window duration, 1.2 seconds. All stations report ready, Marcus said, settling into his command chair. Initiate barrier penetration. The shadow leaped forward with acceleration that should have killed everyone aboard. But the ship's adaptive matter hull didn't just protect against physical forces. It created a pocket of altered space where the crew experienced normal gravity and time flow while the universe outside blurred past at impossible speeds. For a moment that felt like an eternity, they were suspended between realities. The barrier's energy field surrounded them like a tunnel of living light, and Marcus could swear he heard something like music in the electromagnetic radiation washing over their hull. Then they were through, emerging into interstellar space for the first time in a decade. Barrier penetration successful, Kim reported, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. We are officially outside the solar system. A cheer went up from the crew, but Marcus quickly raised his hand for silence. Maintain operational security. We're not here for a sightseeing tour. Sensors show no immediate threats, Elena reported. Long-range scans indicate the nearest Council monitoring station is approximately 12 light-years away. At current detection ranges, we should be invisible to their sensors. Outstanding. Helm, set course for the Kepler 438 system. We have a civilization to contact. The journey to Kepler 438 took 3 days using the dimensional fold drive, a trip that would have taken conventional human technology nearly 800 years. As they traveled, the crew conducted final preparations for humanity's first act of unsanctioned diplomacy since the rejection. Target system coming into sensor range, reported Lieutenant Torres from Tactical. I'm detecting multiple artificial energy signatures consistent with advanced civilization. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. On screen, the main display showed a solar system that bustled with activity. Massive space stations orbited the primary star, harvesting energy on a scale that dwarfed Earth's entire power grid. Shipping lanes stretched between inhabited worlds, marked by the distinctive energy signatures of faster-than-light travel. And everywhere, the telltale signs of a civilization that had long ago mastered the challenges that still plagued humanity. The Kithra, Elena said, consulting her xenobiology files. One of the founding members of the Galactic Council. They've had interstellar civilization for over 6 million years. And they voted to keep us caged, Marcus added grimly. Tactical, I want a full analysis of their defensive capabilities. Scanning now, sir, Torres replied. I'm detecting energy shield generators around all major installations, but the power levels are relatively low. It appears they're designed more for asteroid deflection than military defense. Elena looked up from her console. That makes sense. According to our intelligence, the galaxy has been at peace for millions of years. They probably haven't had to design serious military defenses in longer than our species has existed. Their mistake, Marcus said quietly. Communications. Open a channel to the primary space station. Channel open, sir, reported Ensign Chun. Marcus stood and straightened his uniform. What he was about to do would either open the door to humanity's future or trigger a war that could span the galaxy. But after 10 years of hidden preparation, he was ready for either outcome. Kithran Central Command, this is Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the Human Diplomatic Corps. I request an audience with your system governor to discuss matters of mutual interest. The response came surprisingly quickly. The image that appeared on the main screen showed a being that looked vaguely insectoid, with 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to glitter with internal light. When it spoke, the translation software that humanity had developed from captured council broadcasts rendered its words in crisp, emotionless English. Human vessel, your presence in this system is in violation of Galactic Council sanctions. You will return to your designated containment area immediately or face destruction. Marcus smiled coldly. Governor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Humanity was never consulted about these sanctions, and we do not recognize their legitimacy. We're here to discuss the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between our species and yours. The Kithran's compound eyes seemed to brighten with something like confusion. Human captain, your species is contained for the safety of galactic civilization. The matter is not subject to negotiation. Actually, it is, Marcus replied. You see, containment only works when the contained party doesn't have alternatives. We do. To emphasize his point, Marcus nodded to Torres. The tactical officer activated a system that had been developed specifically for this moment, a demonstration of humanity's new capabilities that would be impossible to ignore. The Shadow's adaptive matter hull began to reconfigure itself, transforming from a sleek reconnaissance vessel into something that looked more like a crystalline flower than a ship. Energy patterns played across its surface in ways that defied conventional physics, and space itself seemed to bend around it like a lens. What you're seeing is adaptive matter technology, Marcus explained as the Kithran stared at the display in obvious shock. We've learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that govern reality itself. Your containment barrier is based on the same principles, which means we understand how to bypass it. That is impossible, the governor said, but its voice carried undertones of uncertainty. Human technology is millennia behind council capabilities. Marcus corrected. 10 years of motivated research can accomplish remarkable things, especially when you have samples of advanced technology to reverse engineer. He gestured again, and the ship's configuration shifted once more, this time creating what appeared to be a miniature star at its center. The fusion reaction was contained within a field matrix that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. This is your technology, Governor, Marcus said, taken from your own ships and improved upon. We've had a decade to study it, enhance it, and develop applications that even you haven't considered. The Kithrin was silent for several long moments. Finally, it spoke again, and this time its voice carried a note of fear. What do you want? Recognition, Marcus replied simply. Trade agreements. Cultural exchange. All the things that should have been offered to us 10 years ago, before your council decided that fear was more important than justice. The council will never allow it, the governor said. Humanity is classified as a dangerous species. Contact with you is forbidden. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Then, perhaps it's time for the classification to change. You see, Governor, we're not asking for the council's permission anymore. We're informing you of our intentions. And if we refuse, then you'll find out firsthand why the council was right to fear us, Marcus replied. But I prefer we could resolve this peacefully. After all, we're both civilized beings. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the shadow floating alone in space near the Kithrin station. Marcus wasn't surprised. He had expected their first diplomatic contact to be challenging. What mattered was that they had demonstrated both humanity's new capabilities and their determination to use them. Captain, Elena called from her station, I'm detecting massive energy spikes from a station. It looks like they're powering up weapons systems. Are they targeting us? Marcus asked. Negative, sir. It appears they're calling for help. Marcus nodded. How long until council reinforcements arrive? Based on our intelligence estimates, probably 6 to 8 hours for the nearest patrol fleet, Torres reported. More than enough time, Marcus said. Helm, set course for the second planet. Scans indicate a population center there that might be more receptive to negotiation. Sir, Elena said hesitantly, are we really going to attack civilian targets if they don't cooperate? Marcus turned to look at her, and she could see something cold and implacable in his eyes. Elena, 10 years ago, the Galactic Council condemned our entire species to perpetual imprisonment without trial, without evidence of wrongdoing, and without appeal. 8 billion human beings were sentenced to live and die in a cage because alien species found us inconvenient. He gestured toward the displays, showing the bustling Kithrin civilization. These people supported that decision. They voted to keep us trapped while they enjoyed the freedom to travel between stars and build whatever they wanted. They had no problem with our suffering as long as it kept them safe. So we're no better than they think we are? Elena asked. No, Marcus replied quietly. We're worse. Because unlike them, we're not going to pretend that morality matters when survival is at stake. They made their choice 10 years ago. Now, they get to live with the consequences. The shadow changed course toward the inhabited planet below, its stealth systems rendering it invisible to Kithrin's sensors. Behind them, the space station continued broadcasting emergency signals to the Galactic Council, warning that humanity had broken free of its containment. By the time the Council forces arrived, they would find a very different situation than they expected. The Kithrins would have a choice to make: recognize humanity's right to exist as equals in the galaxy, or face the consequences of their decade-long complicity in humanity's imprisonment. Either way, the age of hiding in the shadows was over. Humanity had fired the first shot in a war that would reshape the galaxy forever. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of humanity's most closely guarded secret, a massive space fortress hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The Bastion, as it had come to be known, was completely invisible to conventional sensors, its adaptive matter hull bending light and gravity around it like a cloaking device from an ancient science fiction story. But the Bastion was no fiction. Built over the course of 8 years using technology reverse-engineered from Galactic Council artifacts, it represented the culmination of humanity's secret military buildup. 3 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that operated on principles the Council believed were beyond human understanding. It was humanity's answer to millennia of galactic peace. "Admiral, we're receiving the final transmission from Captain Rodriguez," reported Commander Lisa Parr from the communication station. "Operation First Contact was successful. The Kithrans have been presented with our terms." Sarah nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the disposition of forces throughout the solar system. Hidden facilities on Mars, Europa, and Titan were coming online, revealing themselves for the first time as the shadow fleet that humanity had been building in secret. Dozens of ships emerged from concealment, each one incorporating technologies that should have been impossible for a species trapped in their home system. "What's the status of the barrier?" Sarah asked. "Still active, but we're detecting fluctuations," replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Bastion's chief science officer. "Our penetration of the containment field seems to have triggered some kind of automated response. The Council's monitoring systems are trying to compensate for the breach." "Let them," Sarah said grimly. "By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." "Communications. Open a channel to all Shadow Fleet units." "Channel open," Admiral Park confirmed. Sarah activated the fleet-wide broadcast system, knowing that her next words would be heard by nearly 10,000 personnel scattered across humanity's secret military network. These were the men and women who had spent the last decade preparing for a war that most of Earth's population didn't even know was coming. "This is Admiral Chun to all units," she began, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's accumulated anger and determination. "As of 0800 hours today, Operation Liberation has commenced. Captain Rodriguez has successfully initiated contact with the Kithran Republic and delivered our ultimatum. The galaxy now knows that humanity refuses to accept our imprisonment." She paused, looking around at the bridge crew who had dedicated their lives to this moment. "For 10 years, we have been told that we are too dangerous for galactic civilization, that our aggressive nature makes us unsuitable for the peaceful community of stars. Today, we prove that assessment correct. Not because we are mindlessly violent, but because we refuse to be caged by the fear and prejudice of our supposed betters." The tactical display showed movement at the edge of the solar system as the first Council response forces began to arrive. Sarah smiled coldly as she watched the alien ships take position outside the barrier, clearly expecting to find humanity still trapped within. "The Galactic Council has maintained peace for millions of years through strength and the threat of overwhelming force," Sarah continued. "Today they learned that strength is a weapon that cuts both ways. All units, execute Phase 1. Throughout the solar system, hidden bases began powering up systems that had been dormant for years. On Ceres, massive fusion reactors came online to power weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment. In the outer asteroid belt, what appeared to be routine survey drones suddenly revealed themselves as advanced reconnaissance craft. And deep beneath the surface of Europa, something far larger and more dangerous than anyone outside the Shadow Fleet suspected began to stir. "Admiral, the Council forces are attempting to communicate with Earth," Park reported. "They're demanding an explanation for the breach of containment." "Put them through," Sarah ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the familiar crystalline form of Counselor Vexthani. The Zalari representative who had delivered humanity's original rejection now looked distinctly less composed than she had 10 years ago. "Admiral Chen," Vexthani said, her harmonics carrying undertones of both anger and confusion. "The Council demands an immediate explanation for your species' violation of established containment protocols. The human vessel currently in Kithran space has committed an act of aggression against galactic law." "Counselor," Sarah replied with icy politeness, "humanity does not recognize the legitimacy of laws we had no voice in creating. As for aggression, I believe you'll find that Captain Rodriguez has acted with perfect diplomatic propriety. He has simply informed the Kithrans of humanity's new position regarding our status in the galaxy." "Your status is not subject to change," Vexthani said, but her voice carried less certainty than it had during their first encounter. "The containment barrier will prevent any further breaches. Your vessel will be destroyed if it does not return immediately." Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. "Counselor, I think you may be operating under some outdated assumptions about human capabilities. Allow me to provide you with updated information." She nodded to Elena, who activated a system that had been hidden within the Bastion structure for years. The space around the fortress began to shimmer as adaptive matter fields came online, and suddenly, the Council ships found themselves looking at something that shouldn't exist. The Bastion materialized out of nothingness like a metal mountain given life. Its hull was covered with weapon emplacements that glowed with barely contained energy, and the space around it warped visibly as dimensional manipulators bent reality to humanity's will. "This is the HFS Bastion," Sarah announced calmly, "flagship of the Human Liberation Fleet. As you can see, reports of humanity's technological limitations have been greatly exaggerated." The silence from the Council ships stretched for nearly a full minute. When Vexthani finally spoke again, her voice carried harmonics of genuine fear. "This is impossible. Human technology cannot account for such capabilities." "Human technology couldn't," Sarah agreed. "But human determination combined with examples of Council technology, that's proven remarkably effective. Did you really think we would spend 10 years sitting quietly in our cage without learning anything useful?" "The barrier will contain you," Vexthani said, but the assertion sounded hollow. "Your ship in Kithrin space is an anomaly. It cannot be repeated." Sarah's laugh was genuinely amused. "Counselor, that ship isn't an anomaly. It's a demonstration. Would you like to see the real fleet?" Without waiting for an answer, Sarah activated the final phase of humanity's revelation. Throughout the solar system, concealment fields dropped and stealth systems deactivated. Suddenly, the space around Earth swarmed with ships that hadn't existed moments before. The Shadow Fleet revealed itself in its full glory, 200 vessels of various sizes, all incorporating adaptive matter technology and dimensional manipulation systems. They moved with a coordination that spoke of years of planning and training, taking up positions that turned the solar system into a fortress. But the ships were only the beginning. On Luna, what had appeared to be routine mining operations revealed themselves as massive weapons platforms capable of targeting objects at interplanetary distances. On Mars, the Polar Research Station suddenly bristled with defensive systems that could project energy barriers across entire continents. And from the depths of space near Jupiter, something emerged that made even the Bastion look small by comparison. "My God," whispered Commander Park as the massive structure came into view. The Forge was humanity's greatest achievement, and their most closely guarded secret. 10 kilometers long and built using resources stripped from the outer asteroid belt. It was part shipyard, part research facility, and part weapon. Its surface was covered with construction bays that were already assembling new vessels, while its core housed fusion reactors that could power a small star. The Human Liberation Fleet consists of over 300 vessels. "Admiral," Sarah announced, deliberately addressing Vexthani by her military rank rather than her diplomatic title. "Our industrial capacity can produce new ships faster than your scattered patrol fleets can respond to them. And, unlike your forces, we've spent the last decade preparing specifically for war." "This is madness," Vexthani said, her composure finally cracking completely. "You would destroy the peace that has lasted for millions of years." "We would claim the freedom that is our birthright," Sarah replied. "The peace you speak of was built on the exclusion of species you deemed unworthy. That peace was broken the moment you decided that humanity didn't deserve to exist as equals in this galaxy. The Council will not allow this," Vexthani threatened. "The full might of galactic civilization will be brought to bear against your species." "Then, you'd better hope your full might is enough," Sarah said. "Because humanity is no longer asking for permission. We're taking our place among the stars whether you approve or not." The transmission ended, leaving the Bastion's bridge in tense silence. Around them, displays showed the movements of Council forces as they tried to process the scope of what they were facing. The small patrol fleet that had arrived to investigate the barrier breach was clearly inadequate for the situation they now confronted. "Admiral," Elena said quietly, "are we really going to fight the entire galaxy?" Sarah turned to look at her old friend and colleague. "Elena, the galaxy made its choice about us 10 years ago. They decided we were too dangerous to be free, too primitive to be trusted, too aggressive to be allowed among civilized beings. Well, They were right about one thing. We are dangerous. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing humanity's secret fleet. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed that dangerous meant uncontrollable, that aggression meant stupidity. They thought that by keeping us trapped, they could prevent us from becoming a threat. Instead, they gave us time to prepare, Elena said, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. They gave us 10 years to study their technology, reverse engineer their capabilities, and develop weapons they couldn't imagine. They gave us 10 years to plan, to organize, and to build a military force designed specifically to challenge their supremacy. And now, Sarah's expression was grim but determined. Now we show them that humanity's greatest strength was never our aggression or our technology. It was our absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy rejected us because they feared what we might become. Today, they discover that their fears were entirely justified. As alarms began to sound throughout the bastion, indicating the arrival of additional Council forces at the edge of the solar system, Sarah Chun prepared to command humanity's first interstellar war. It would be a conflict that would reshape the galaxy and determine whether humans would take their place among the stars as equals or conquerors. The shadows had revealed themselves at last, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 years after the first shots of humanity's liberation war, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the peaceful confederation that had existed for millennia. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the HIFS Retribution, humanity's newest dreadnought, watching the surrender ceremony that would mark the end of organized Galactic Council resistance. The Nexus Prime Station, once the beating heart of galactic government, now flew human flags alongside the banners of nearly a dozen species that had joined what the media called the Liberation Coalition. It had taken 36 months of careful warfare, brilliant diplomacy, and the systematic dismantling of million-year-old power structures, but humanity had achieved what had once seemed impossible. They had won. Admiral, Counselor Vexthani has arrived for the ceremony, reported Captain Marcus Rodriguez, his uniform bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Liberation Command. The young officer who had initiated humanity's first unsanctioned diplomatic contact now commanded one of the most powerful fleets in known space. Sarah nodded, adjusting her dress uniform before making her way to the station's central assembly hall. The massive chamber, built to accommodate representatives from hundreds of worlds, was now arranged for a very different purpose than its architect had intended. As she entered, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The war that the Council had expected to be a brief police action had instead become a cascade of revelations that shattered the foundation of galactic civilization. It had started with the Kitherans, who had been the first to discover that the peaceful galaxy they thought they knew was built on lies. When humanity had arrived in their system with impossible technology and uncomfortable truths, it had forced them to confront the reality of what the Council had become over millions of years of unchallenged rule. The revelation that the Council's protective barriers weren't just used to contain dangerous species, but to hide the systematic exploitation of younger civilizations had been the first crack in their authority. When evidence emerged that dozens of species had been secretly quarantined or managed to prevent them from challenging Council supremacy, the coalition of resistance had grown rapidly. Admiral Chun, came a familiar voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching, her scientist's uniform replaced by the formal robes of a diplomatic representative. Over the past 3 years, Elena had become humanity's most effective ambassador, using her xenobiology expertise to build bridges with species that had spent millennia fearing each other. Ambassador Vasquez, Sarah replied with a slight smile. Ready to make history, ready to finish making it, Elena corrected. Though I still can't believe we actually pulled this off. Sarah looked around the assembly hall, where representatives from 43 different species were taking their places. The Kitherans, who had been humanity's first reluctant allies, sat beside the massive Threnodidae, whose warrior culture had immediately embraced humanity's direct approach to problem-solving. The crystalline synthesis entities hummed with harmonic frequencies that translated as barely contained excitement, while the floating Nexari seemed to pulse with colors that hadn't been seen since their species had been peacefully integrated into the Council 3 million years ago. We didn't pull it off, Sarah said quietly. They did it to themselves. All we did was refuse to stay in the cage they built for us. The ceremony began with a formal reading of the Liberation Accords, the document that would dissolve the Galactic Council and replace it with a federation based on equality rather than ancient privilege. As the terms were read aloud in dozens of languages, Sarah found herself remembering the moment when everything had changed. It hadn't been a dramatic battle or a stunning technological breakthrough. It had been a simple question posed by a Kithran philosopher during one of the early coalition meetings. If the Council must use force to maintain peace, is it truly peaceful? That question had spread through the galaxy like a virus, carried by the quantum communication networks that the Council had built to maintain their authority. Species that had accepted their subordinate status for millions of years suddenly began asking why they needed protection from younger, supposedly more dangerous civilizations. They began wondering why Council space was divided between core worlds with full representation and frontier territories with limited rights. Most importantly, they began questioning why humanity's rapid technological development was considered a threat while the Council's own technological stagnation was presented as wisdom. The former Galactic Council formally surrenders all claims to governmental authority. Red Ambassador Keln of the Vorthan Republic, a species that had joined the Liberation Coalition after discovering that their own first contact with the galaxy had been carefully managed to prevent them from developing independently. All military forces will be disbanded or integrated into the new Galactic Liberation Defense Force under human command. Sarah winced slightly at that last part. She had argued against making human leadership formal policy, but the other coalition species had insisted. After witnessing humanity's military effectiveness and political innovation, they had concluded that the species originally deemed too dangerous for galactic civilization was exactly what the galaxy needed to prevent future stagnation. And now, Ambassador Keln continued, we call upon Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Liberation Fleet to address the Assembly. Sarah walked to the central podium, looking out at faces that represented billions of beings across thousands of worlds. Some were former enemies who had fought against humanity's liberation. Others were allies who had risked everything to support a species they had never met. All of them were now depending on humanity to lead them into an uncertain future. Representatives of the Galactic Liberation Federation, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to acknowledge a fundamental truth that the old council tried to deny. Diversity of thought and approach is not a weakness to be managed, but a strength to be cultivated. She gestured toward the mixed assembly of species. For millions of years, galactic civilization was built on the principle that peace required uniformity, that stability demanded the suppression of anything that might challenge established order. This philosophy created a galaxy that was peaceful, but also stagnant, safe but also sterile. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The war had not just been about humanity's freedom. It had forced every species to confront their own limitations and lost potential. Humanity was rejected by the old order because we represented change, Sarah continued. Because our rapid development and refusal to accept limitations threatened a system built on the assumption that progress was dangerous. Today, we establish a new order built on different principles. She activated a holographic display that showed the structure of the new federation. Instead of the hierarchical pyramid that had characterized council governance, the Liberation Federation was organized as an interconnected network where each member species contributed according to their strengths rather than their age or political influence. The Galactic Liberation Federation will not seek to contain or manage its members, Sarah announced. Instead, we will challenge each other to grow, to explore, to push the boundaries of what is possible. We will embrace the chaos of progress over the safety of stagnation. A young Kithran representative stood up from the assembly floor. Admiral, what guarantee do we have that humanity will not simply replace the Council's tyranny with your own? It was a fair question, and one that Sarah had expected. None, she replied bluntly. There are no guarantees in the system we're building, because guarantees require control, and control inevitably leads to stagnation. What I can promise is that humanity has no interest in ruling a galaxy full of subject species. She smiled, And there's something fierce and wild in the expression. We want rivals. We want competitors. We want other species that will challenge us to be better than we are. The galaxy that feared us because we might become dangerous never understood that danger is just another word for potential. And if conflict arise, ask a Threnodai war chief. Then, we'll resolve them through strength, negotiation, or innovation, Sarah replied. Just as we always have. The difference is that we won't pretend conflicts don't exist or try to prevent them through suppression. We'll face them head-on and grow stronger through the process. The formal ceremony continued for several hours, but Sarah found her attention drifting to the viewports that showed the space around Nexus Prime. Human ships moved alongside vessels from dozens of other species, their varied designs reflecting the diversity that the old council had tried so hard to suppress. In the distance, she could see construction ships beginning work on the new Federation capital, a massive space station designed not for administrative control, but for collaboration and exchange. It would be a place where species could meet as equals to share knowledge, trade innovations, and challenge each other to reach for greater achievements. Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded and delegates began departing for their home systems, Elena joined Sarah on the observation deck. So what now? Elena asked. We've torn down a million-year-old empire and convinced the galaxy to follow us into an uncertain future. How do we avoid becoming the very thing we fought against? Sarah considered the question as she watched the ships departing Nexus Prime, carrying news of the Federation's establishment to thousands of worlds. We remember why we fought, she said finally, not for power or control, but for the right to grow without limits, for the chance to see how far we can push ourselves when we're not held back by other people's fears. And if we fail, then we fail trying to be something greater than we were, Sarah replied, which is better than succeeding at staying safely mediocre. Elena laughed. 10 years ago, I thought you and Marcus were crazy for believing we could challenge galactic civilization. Now I'm wondering if our ambitions were too small. Sarah's smile was sharp and predatory. Elena, we've just proven that a supposedly primitive species could topple a government that had ruled for millions of years. We've shown that diversity beats uniformity, that innovation beats tradition, and that the hunger to grow is more powerful than the desire to control. She gestured toward the ships disappearing into hyperspace, carrying representatives back to worlds that were already beginning to experiment with technologies and social structures that would have been forbidden under council rule. The galaxy rejected us because they thought we were too dangerous for their peaceful civilization, Sarah said. They were right about the danger part, but wrong about everything else. We weren't too dangerous for civilization. We were exactly what civilization needed to avoid dying of its own success. As the HIFS Retribution prepared to depart Nexus Prime for Earth, Sarah Chun took one last look at the station that had once been the symbol of everything humanity was denied. Now it would become something new, a beacon for species that refused to accept limitations, a gathering place for those who chose growth over safety. The galaxy had rejected humanity once, branding them too dangerous for the peaceful order that had reigned for millennia. In response, humanity had torn down that order and built something better in its place. They had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing a civilization can do is play it safe. The age of stagnation was over. The age of limitless potential had begun, and at its center stood a species that had been forged in the crucible of rejection and emerged stronger than anyone had thought possible. Humanity had built their empire in the shadows. Now they would lead it into the light.